Secretary, I don't trust your judgment. You made the comment to my colleague that there's no daylight between you and the president, which calls into question your role and, again, accountability. And so I got to ask, has there ever been any time that you disagree with the president on this war or anything in general?
I would never betray conversations that we've had.
Okay,
The commander
so you can't even
deserves
acknowledge
candid
that you've
discussion
ever
in
even
private.
disagreed with the man, like his choice of tie, that dance, anything. You haven't disagreed on anything.
I've never relayed the discussions I had with the commander-in-chief.
Okay, because it seems to me that rather than being Trump's Secretary of Defense, that sounds like you're just being Trump's secretary. And we need someone who's going to be there that is actually advising, that is also pushing back when necessary and serving the country as opposed to the president. So you said you've never called him out privately or publicly, because we know that hasn't done. But have you ever said the words? You don't have to tell me what it was about. Have you ever said the words, Mr. President, I disagree with you?
As I said, I don't relay the private conversations that a commander-in-chief deserves.
You can't even acknowledge that, like if you've just said, Mr. President, you're wrong about this or you're wrong about that. You can't even acknowledge, you can't even admit that if that's happened.
You can ask it again if you want, but I don't relay the private conversations that a commander-in-chief deserves.
The objectives of this war have constantly shifted and changed. You see that, though, right? Like, you can acknowledge that. Because 1 minute it was to dismantle the Iranian nuclear program. But I don't know how that objective has not now been the listed objectives as far as I understand. Then there was regime change. Trump even said when announcing the start of the war, the hour of your freedom is at hand. It's yours to take. He also posted on Truth Social in January, help is on the way, to the Iranians posting in the street. Do you still believe in this particular objective?
The objectives have been clear from the beginning, and I've supported the president throughout in having the courage to take on this threat.
Okay, so then let's talk about what else has he said? So let's talk about the Trump doctrine. So on November 6th, the president said he was all about ending wars, not starting new ones. Yet in the so-called doctrine, the conflict has not answered why we're in the war. The objectives have changed. We're not sure about the exit strategy. This, to me, is the definition of open-ended or forever war. And you cannot claim to end forever wars while engaging in one. And then here's the one that really gets me. So I'll know when it's over when I feel it in my bones. So, Mr. Secretary, war decisions should be based on defined military objectives. You agree with that statement, correct?
It's the commander-in-chief makes the call on behalf of the American people when our objectives are completed.
There should be clearly defined military objectives. That's safe to say?
Ultimately, the commander-in-chief makes the decision about when our objectives are achieved.
Okay, because I'm just trying to figure out, like, what kind of analysis, evaluation are we looking at with objectives when it's just what the president feels in his bones? Like, are we talking about like some Da Vinci Petruvian man or what? Like, what are we talking about when we just talk about feeling it in your bones? Because my thing is, we're not set up here to trust anyone's judgment. We're here to represent our districts and the American people. And so my next question is, the problem that I'm concerned with is that Iran continues to increase their negotiating leverage with us. And so we've been told that we've won this war, it'll be over in a few days, but now they didn't control the Strait of Hormuz, and now they do have leverage in the Strait of Hormuz. I remember even in the strikes in June, after the strikes in June, I should say, they struck Al-Udeid, and we never responded to that. As a matter of fact, Trump even said he knew that strike was coming and he allowed it. Do you agree with that?
Ultimately, the president's been clear about his objectives, and if Iran thinks they're going to outdeal the best deal maker on the planet, they got another thing coming.
But they struck us and we didn't strike back, and you're okay with that? He even said he authorized, he allowed it. He said that, and you're okay with that?
The president has done many bold things for this country to ensure Iran never has a nuclear weapon.
Okay, well, allowing another country to attack us, isn't that treason?
Allowing Iran to get a nuclear weapon.
Time's expired. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Arizona, Mr.
This exchange was not really about a single military operation. It was about presidential power, independent judgment inside the Pentagon, and whether America was drifting into another open-ended conflict without clearly defined objectives. Representative Wesley Bell opened with an unusually direct statement. "I don't trust your judgment." That line immediately established the tone. Bell's argument was not simply that he disagreed with Secretary Pete Hegseth on policy. He appeared to be questioning whether Hegseth was functioning as an independent national security advisor at all, or merely as a public defender of President Trump's decisions. The exchange centered on one recurring question. Has Hegseth ever disagreed with the president? Again and again, Bell attempted to force even a minimal acknowledgement that disagreement inside high-level decision-making exists. He even reduced the question to something deliberately trivial, asking whether Hegseth had ever disagreed with Trump about something as simple as a tie or a dance. Hegseth refused every version of the question. Instead, he repeatedly argued that conversations with the commander-in-chief are private and should remain private. That response reflected a traditional executive branch principle. Cabinet officials are expected to maintain confidentiality around presidential deliberations. But Bell was pressing toward a deeper issue. His concern appeared to be whether loyalty had overtaken accountability inside the national security chain of command. At one point, Bell contrasted being Trump's Secretary of Defense with simply being Trump's secretary. That distinction mattered politically because it framed the role of defense leadership in constitutional rather than personal terms. Cabinet officials are supposed to advise presidents honestly, including when they disagree. Oversight critics often worry that administrations become less effective when internal dissent disappears or becomes politically dangerous. Bell's questioning reflected exactly that fear. The hearing then shifted toward the stated objectives of the Iran conflict. Bell argued that the administration's goals had changed repeatedly. First dismantling Iran's nuclear capabilities, then broader regime change rhetoric, followed by increasingly unclear end-state definitions. This is one of the oldest criticisms associated with prolonged military conflicts. Mission drift. Wars frequently begin with narrow objectives, but as conditions evolve, goals expand, rhetoric escalates, and strategic clarity weakens. Bell appeared to be arguing that this conflict was following that exact pattern. Hegseth rejected the premise entirely. He insisted the objectives had been clear from the beginning and repeatedly defended the president's willingness to confront Iran aggressively. But Bell kept returning to the same point. If the objectives are truly clear, where is the defined exit strategy? That question became especially sharp when Bell referenced comments suggesting the war would end when the president feels it in his bones. Bell's criticism here was fundamentally institutional. Military operations are traditionally expected to rely on measurable objectives, operational benchmarks, strategic assessments, and defined conditions for success. Bell appeared deeply skeptical of rhetoric that sounded more intuitive or emotional than strategically measurable. At one point, he openly mocked the idea of war policy being guided by instinctive feeling rather than formal analysis. That section of the hearing exposed a major divide in modern wartime politics. Supporters of strong executive leadership often argue presidents must retain flexibility and strategic ambiguity during conflicts. Critics argue that vague objectives create the conditions for forever wars, prolonged conflicts without clear endpoints or accountability. Bell clearly aligned himself with the second perspective. Then the discussion turned toward deterrence and retaliation. Bell argued that Iran had gained leverage through control of the Strait of Hormuz and pointed to earlier Iranian strikes that did not trigger major American retaliation. This section revealed another recurring tension in national security policy. When does restraint signal strategic discipline, and when does it signal weakness? Bell appeared concerned that failure to respond forcefully to attacks could embolden adversaries. Hegseth framed the administration's strategy instead around broader long-term objectives, particularly preventing Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons. And then came perhaps the most provocative line of the hearing. Bell asked whether allowing another country to attack the United States without retaliation amounted to treason. That was a highly charged accusation rhetorically, though framed as a question rather than a formal allegation. It also highlighted how emotionally and politically intense debates over national security have become. Historically, disagreements over military strategy often revolved around troop levels, budgets, alliances, or battlefield tactics. Increasingly, however, wartime debates are framed in terms of loyalty, patriotism, betrayal, and institutional trust itself. That is what made this exchange significant. Beneath the partisan conflict was a deeper constitutional question. What is the proper role of a Secretary of Defense? Is the job primarily to publicly defend presidential decisions and maintain unity within the chain of command? Or is it to serve as an independent strategic check willing to visibly challenge leadership when necessary? That debate is as old as civilian control of the military itself. And it becomes especially urgent during wars where objectives remain contested, timelines remain unclear, and public confidence depends heavily on trust in leadership judgment. What this hearing revealed was not simply disagreement over Iran policy. It revealed growing concern inside Congress about whether institutional independence within national security leadership is weakening under the pressure of modern political loyalty. And that concern is likely to continue long after this hearing fades from the headlines. What do you think? Should defense secretaries publicly demonstrate independence from presidents during wartime decisions, or is visible unity inside the chain of command more important during active conflicts? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if you value long-form congressional analysis that goes beyond headlines and examines the strategy, accountability, and institutional power struggles shaping Washington, subscribe to Capitol Oversight for more deep oversight coverage and hearing breakdowns.